right. Should we get started, guys? All right. Well, the purpose of this dinner is a couple different reasons. Number one reason is we tried to do this class about a month ago, and great class. It went for 3 hours, lots of information. I mean, cancer is a topic that you can go for weeks on when you're really digging into the research. But I tried to live stream it, and the camera cut off after 10 minutes. So all it got was my introduction. So it's like, okay, so I need to put the main information back out there so that my patients have the best information for preventing cancer for themselves. The second thing is I know that there were some guests and some people that couldn't make it to that first one because the live stream wasn't there. Obviously, we all learn better in person. And so as part of that, you all have no cheats in front of you. That goes through the entire 3-hour presentation. We're just going to be covering basically the very first part of that. So even though it looks like a full page of notes, we'll probably just get into the nitty gritty of the first section. And then if you need to, you can write in the margins other stuff because I tend to talk in rabbit trails. So if you have questions, rabbit trail. If I have a thought bubble, rabbit trail. So we'll get to where we need to go with it. But yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying the food. I think you figured out it's real, authentic Mexican. We actually ran into the mother of the owner of the Taco Loco food truck at People City Mission, and she told us that her son was doing this and was all her recipes. I'm like, well, this is great. Like we can get real, authentic Mexican, and we can have a fun dinner with it. So hopefully you guys have enough room to get seconds afterwards. We bought enough food for 20 people, and obviously we're not, going to take it all up. So help yourselves to extra here. But the reason why we're hitting cancer so hard is because worldwide cancer is the #1 killer of everyone, male, female, young, old. It's the #1 cause of death in kids. It's superseded even accidental deaths in adults. In the United States, it is actually #2 cause of death behind heart disease, but where heart disease has mostly remained stable since about the 1970s, 1980s, cancer has been creeping up, and the difference last year was about 620,000 to 580,000. So it's getting closer and closer, and it's about to flip-flop, and not because heart disease is going down. And then you look at the research on cancer, and according to the Journal of American Pharmacology Research, they said that cancer is 95% lifestyle preventable. And they said that, and then because of that study, the NFL came out with a program called the Crucial Catch. They partnered with the American Cancer Society, and then for several years during the month of October, they had like this rainbow stripe on the back of the end zone, and it said Crucial Catch. And it was a website that you could go to where you could input a bunch of data about your lifestyle, and it would tell you your cancer risk. And it hasn't moved the numbers at all. But here's the thing, it really is lifestyle preventable, 95% of the time. And so what I want to teach you guys tonight are the main things that I've learned about cancer prevention. And for most of us, we're failing these 5 categories. And so I want to make sure that you guys have a pathway to moving forward that not only sets you up to not build cancer, but also if you're already building cancer, to start fighting cancer and killing cancer. And that's why it's called Battle Ready. So a little bit about us before I jump into it. Cheryl, who you met on the way in, she's our nurse here. She has almost 40 years of experience in the nursing field, the last 2 decades of which have been teaching both pharmacology and, number of classes. Yeah, pathophysiology. Like when we did the class, we actually did the class together, and she had more of the technical details than I did. But because we're just doing the 30-minute version, I'm going to be the one talking tonight. Not to say I'm not the more long-winded one, but that's neither here nor there. I hired her about 15 months ago because she wanted to help my patients get healthier than what I was already able to accomplish on my own. And so she stepped into the role as what we call our 5 essentials coordinator. And so anything that's indirectly or directly not chiropractic that relates to health, she's our go-to person. So if you have questions about diet or exercise or supplementation, I mean, how many pounds did you lose last year? Like 40 pounds just last year. So yeah, she did excellent applying that herself, and I thought it was just super cool that we could bring her in. Now me, I've been doing this about a decade now. Before this, I was actually a pastor. I worked in campus ministry, and then I met my wife, and she's like, "I'm not marrying a pastor." And I'm like, "That's okay." I didn't feel like this was God's calling for my life. I felt like God wanted me to be on more the help side of things. That my gifting and my background is in science. I had an undergrad where I studied engineering degrees. I studied political science. I studied international affairs. I'm like, man, I should really be helping people. And so I jumped from there. We started looking around for different ways that I could help people. My wife pointed towards the health field. We looked at med school. We looked at PA school. We looked at PT school. We even looked at nursing. And we were driving home from Thanksgiving one day, and she said, as we passed by a chiropractor, "Have you thought about chiropractic?" And I said, "No, I actually hadn't." But that started the wheels turning. And she was finishing up her master's degree at Georgia Tech. And so just down the road from Georgia Tech is the biggest chiropractic school in the world, Life University. And so we went over there, we visited, fell in love with the campus, fell in love with the mindset. We could just tell, like, this was a health bubble. Like, the people that were there were some of the healthiest people in the world, former Olympic athletes coming in to get their chiropractic degree, former professional athletes, people in food and nutrition science. They have one of the best holistic dietetic programs in the world there. They have the only, or the one of two, or at least when I left, positive psychology master's programs that you could get other than Harvard University. And so I was like, this is it. Like, if I want to help people get healthy, you go to where people are healthy. And so I get there, and about a week into the program, I call my mom, which is about a week too late. And I ring her up, and she says right away, "Jake, good to hear from you. I'm so proud of you for closing the loop and becoming a chiropractor." I was like, where was this when I was looking for which field I was supposed to go into? She's like, "Well, didn't you know the story of how a chiropractor saved your life when you were a baby?" I was like, "No, I'd never heard this before in my life." And so what happened was I was a C-section birth, and it was very traumatic. Cord prolapse, emergency, get one doctor on each leg, jerk me out. But I scored a 9 out of 10 on the APGAR, so about as healthy as you can possibly be coming out. But about 2 weeks later, while I was in the middle of feeding, I quit breathing and turned blue. And that started a 6-month process of quitting breathing every night, 14 times a night. So you can imagine my mom's stress levels, the fear involved with my mom and my dad, and just, I could pass at any time. Well, they kept me alive. The doctors kept me alive, but they couldn't come up with a diagnosis. They're like, "Well, maybe he's a SIDS baby, but you're just too on top of it." Like, they weren't sleeping to keep me alive. They had me on breathing monitors and rescue O2, and they were doing mouth to mouth. Seemed like every single night. And so they're telling their friends and family, like, "Hey, pray for Jacob. He's about to die. We got to figure out an answer for him. Pray that God will lead us to the right doctor." Well, my mom's best friend, she went to her chiropractor and she said, "Well, pray for Jacob, right? He's having problems breathing." And he said, "Well, why don't you bring him in and see if I can help him?" And so she said, "Okay, yeah, no, let's go tell Kelly." And so she told my mom, and my mom was like, "I don't know about that chiropractic stuff. That seems weird. Like, why would you need to adjust a baby's neck?" And so she doesn't go. And this is pretty early in the process. And so for 6 months, my mom's best friend keeps giving her little hints and little pushes, like, "Hey, you should try my chiropractor for Jake. I mean, you're not getting anywhere with these other doctors." And she wasn't. It was the whole time I continued to quit breathing, go to all these doctors, all these specialists, in and out of emergency rooms. And finally, after 6 months, my mom relented. And she said, "Okay, I'll go to your chiropractor." She goes in, he takes one look at me, goes right to the top of my neck. The top bone in my neck is shoved over to the side and twisted around my brainstem in the exact position my head was stuck in the birth canal. He did one adjustment, and I've never had a breathing problem since. And it was because of that I survived to be able to build this and give you guys supper tonight. So, yay! Right. So we're gonna dive a little bit more into the vagus nerve here in a minute. But what I really wanted to teach you guys tonight are the main 5 differences between a healthy cell and a cancer cell. So when it comes to health is a state of 100% optimal function and the ability of the body to heal. Your symptoms and even signs oftentimes don't show up until you've lost 40% function. So if you've got a cancer diagnosis, you've actually had cancer for about 20 years before it actually shows up as diagnosable. Sometimes less, sometimes more, that's an average. But there are key components that make up a healthy cell and make up a cancer cell. So number one, a cancer cell, healthy cell uses oxygen for fuel. This is the most efficient and effective way to get energy into a healthy cell, is to use oxygen. Doing it that way, one glucose molecule, one sugar molecule will create 38 ATP. That's pretty efficient. Doing it the other way, when you don't use oxygen for fuel, one glucose molecule only creates 2 ATP. That's a very, very inefficient way to do it. And so what we see in the research is that healthy cells primarily use that oxygen, and cancer cells are running anaerobically. They don't use oxygen. So we need that oxygen in there. Number two, healthy cells don't need sugar for fuel. You know, we say one glucose equals 38 ATP, but you can go into ketosis, create a ketone body, and it produces 22 ATP without any sugar at all. Cancer cells, they primarily use sugar for fuel. They don't even have the capacity to turn ketone bodies into energy at all. And so you're stuck doing this all the time because you don't have oxygen and you're only using sugar. Number three, healthy cells thrives with or without inflammation. In fact, inflammation in a healthy cell is usually the healing process happening. Your immune system starts to respond, inflames around the cell reacts accordingly, and then goes without inflammation. It pushes it back once it's healed. Cancer cells have a chronic inflammatory environment. They're always inflamed. It's like if you sprain your ankle and you never stop spraining it all the time, you're going to wear that ankle joint right out. Cancer cells, basically, you're spraining that quote unquote ankle all the time, and it has a constant inflammatory environment that basically creates an autoimmune response. Next, and this one just kind of blew my mind when we get to the cancer side of things, but a healthy cell, it needs proper nerve supply. If you disconnect a healthy cell from the nervous system, it dies. Cancer cells, they don't need proper nerve supply. They actually, in school is when this research came out. And so I'm learning all this other stuff, learning about chiropractic, and it's almost like there's two sides of the school. There's a diagnosis side of the school, and then there's a chiropractic side of the school, and we're trying to mix the two, but really, you learn your adjusting classes, and then you put your different hat on, and you go in and you learn how to diagnose stuff. And you learn all the research about chiropractic, and then you learn all the research about diseases. And one of the coolest one kind of bridged the gap here for me. And what it said was that they went in, and the hypothesis was they would cut the nerves going to tumors. And because they would be disconnected, hopefully they would shrink and die, just like any healthy cell would. But when they cut the nerve going to the tumor just started growing exponentially. And they're like, well, we shouldn't do that, right? The other thing that I learned in school, because the research came out about the same time, was some of the exploratory and experimental studies that they were doing on the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is your primary not stress response, but the relax and digestion response. So that's this blue nerve that comes off here. Yeah, parasympathetic. Thank you. Parasympathetic nerve of the digestive system, of the heart, of the lungs. Most of your immune system is run because the vagus nerve runs, right? So what they were doing is they started off just taking some patients with autoimmune conditions, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, the works, and they were saying, okay, so if the vagus nerve controls the immune system, for the most part, then if we stimulate that, it should make the immune system respond better. And so they put an electromagnet in the vagus nerve, and they gave all these patients a magnet on the outside where they could just rub it up and down a spot on their neck, and it would create an electrical stimulus through the vagus nerve. Well, these patients started getting better from their autoimmune conditions. Well, that's pretty awesome. And so then what did chiropractors do? They found out this research, and they said, well, you don't need to stimulate the vagus nerve by inserting an electromagnet in here. We stimulate the vagus nerve every single day by adjusting that C1 vertebra, the atlas bone. And they did research to support it. They measured the measure of the vagus nerve is something called heart rate variability. You don't just stick electrodes into the vagus nerve because it's very deep. It goes deep below everything else. And so they measure heart rate variability because the vagus nerve controls that. And what that is a measure of the ability of the heart rate and blood pressure to come up as needed and come down when it's not needed. And so they measured this both in the cancer patients, with the electromagnet stimulation, and they measured it in the chiropractic adjustments. And the chiropractic adjustments actually got better vagal nerve tone. They got better heart rate variability coming out of it. So it's really cool what we know about how just making cells healthy has to do with just getting that vagus nerve functioning properly and how much just chiropractic has a role in that. And then lastly here, a healthy cell has a slightly alkaline pH, usually about 7.3 to 7.5, somewhere in there. A cancer cell has an acidic or highly alkaline environment. It's usually below 6 or above like 8.5 to 9. And so, you look at all this stuff and you can say, okay, so what things should we be doing to make sure that we're building healthy cells in our body? Because all of us are building cells right now. We get to choose whether we're building healthy cells or we're building sick cells. And it comes down to our lifestyle. And it's these 5 things. Number 1, your stress. The stress of your environment, and not just the stress of your environment, but how you respond to it, right? Because all of us have stress, right? We could go out here and be pulling up to 56th on our way up to Old Highway 2. I guess it's a Nebraska highway now. And somebody slams on their brake at a yellow light and you're like, oh, gotta pull up really short. You could, 1, like, oh, well, I'm glad I didn't hit him. Thank God for that. Or 2, be like, that MFer, what's he doing? I should get out and tell him give him a piece of my mind, right? Which response is actually going to build cancer?
One about getting out.
Yeah, exactly. The second one, that type of reaction, jumping into the sympathetic nervous system, is going to create an environment in your body that's more acidic and that forces you to become a sugar burner just by releasing cortisol into your bloodstream. Second thing here, I'll get to in a minute. Third thing, nutrition. You are what you eat and you are what you ate. When you're looking at this, if you are, and most Americans are, if you are a sugar burner, then you are feeding any cancer cells that you grow on purpose or accidentally. I have 350 pounds of sugar in the back of my office. That is the average amount that a typical American will consume in a year if they have anywhere between 3 and 5 sodas a week. If you don't eat sodas, good for you, or drink sodas, it drops to 250 pounds. 150 years ago, we were consuming 5 pounds of sugar a year. So even if that amount of sugar was healthy for us, just the transition genetically and epigenetically from going from 5 pounds of sugar a year to 250 pounds of sugar a year for a non-soda drinker is massive, let alone that that's the primary fuel for cancer.
So you're talking about the processed sugar, not the natural food-based type of sugar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now we're also talking about net carbs in a way, because if it's ultra processed food, if it's an ultra processed carbohydrate, it acts the exact same way that sugar does. Your body breaks it down and it becomes sugar in your body. Honey and raw maple syrup, raw honey and raw maple syrup, their electrons spin differently, and so cancer doesn't like to use those for fuel. But it creates an environment in your body that makes you a sugar burner. It raises your insulin, your blood insulin levels, and it creates more problems, creates that environment that cancer likes if you're getting too much of those things. Now, if you're eating, Granny Smith apples, or you're eating grapefruit, yeah, there's enough fiber in those fruits where it's not actually going to spike your blood sugar. It's not going to spike your insulin levels. But if every single night you're going home and you're pouring monk fruit or raw honey on everything, it will spike your insulin levels. It will spike your blood sugar eventually, because your body's going to create it when it has high insulin levels. So there's a lot of very specific things that we need to pay attention to when we're talking about what's an acceptable sugar. It depends on what your risk factors are, whether raw honey is healthy for you or not, if raw maple syrup is healthy for you or not. And so we got to be very, very careful with that. So good question there. So nutrition has a lot more components to it, but the next biggest thing in nutrition is inflammatory fats. And when I say inflammatory fats, most people think of fat as just being bad for you because that's what they've been telling us for the last 50 years. Not all fat is bad for you. There's such a thing as essential fatty acids, and our brains require them. Our nervous system requires them. If we don't eat our essential fatty acids, our nervous system will shrivel up and die. There's a big reason why Alzheimer's and Parkinson's has spiked is that we just haven't been getting those essential fatty acids in because the FDA and the USDA villainized all fats 50 years ago. And so we need to be getting healthy fats into our diet while also making sure that we don't get the processed fats out of there. So like the Siete tortilla chips that you guys are eating tonight, those ones are made with avocado oil. Avocado oil is one of the healthiest oils that you can eat out there. Another good oil is olive oil, but not when it's heated up or not when it's been processed too much. Another good oil would be just raw butter.
What about coconut oil?
Coconut oil is fantastic, but you have to make sure that it's not overly processed. You know, if you look at some of the unhealthy fats that most of us consume, it's usually a processed or refined seed oil. The biggest one, the one that Americans like to consume the most, is going to be your canola oil. And canola is not even a plant. That just stands for Canadian oil low acid. It comes from a seed called the rape seed, R-A-P-E. You can see the marketing nightmare that that one would have. So they rebranded it, made a canola oil, sold it as a health food, but it creates a very inflammatory environment there. So we could go in nutrition all day. Next one is fitness. If we're talking about getting oxygen into cells, you have to be getting oxygen into every single cell of your body. You know, if you sit on the couch all day, you think you're getting oxygen into every single cell. No, it can't. And so we have to make sure that we're pumping it there. And so typical things that, you know, you'll get advice from a medical practitioner, you know, as you get up in years is just go for a walk. And that's a great start. Don't let me tell you that walking is bad for you because it's not. But if you walk for an hour versus for 5 to 15 minutes, you go 20 seconds hard and then rest for 20 seconds and 20 seconds hard and rest for 20 seconds. And you do that 20 seconds on, 20 seconds off for 10, 12, 15 minutes. You'll get more oxygen into all the cells of your body than you will in an hour of walking. Right? So high intensity interval training. That's very important for getting oxygen to where it needs to be. And the last one here, when it comes to cancer, this is really key. We have to get rid of toxins, but we have to reduce the exposure. We're never going to completely get out of toxins. They're everywhere. I mean, it's in the tablecloth, it's in the HVAC system, it's coming out of the carpet, it's coming off the paint on the walls. And so we just have to find where those sources of toxicity are the greatest and limit them. And one of the biggest ones is going to be what you cook your food in. Because it's not only touching and then off-gassing and then going into the food and then going into your system, but it's all of those things all at once, right? It's not just one thing. And so Teflon pans, probably one of the worst. The EPA has recommended that it be removed from the market since way back in 2010. I remember that was the year I started chiropractic school. I'm like, oh yeah, well next year it'll be off the market. I won't have to teach anybody about this. What do they keep doing? Because the EPA actually has no regulatory power. They just keep making the recommendation for the next year, and the Teflon manufacturers have no actual incentive to remove it from the market. It is one of the places that we have access to that has forever chemicals in it that we know are carcinogens. You put a canary to the side of a stove where you're using a Teflon pan, it will die because of the off-gassing of the Teflon pans.
Question, is Teflon called by other names, other products?
I believe it can be, but usually it says Teflon on there. But basically, when I'm looking at a pan, I'm looking for stainless steel, I'm looking for a ceramic coated or a cast iron pan. And with ceramic coated, just know that you're going to have to replace a ceramic coating once a year. They wear out super fast. And if your budget is like so sensitive that you can't afford $20 for a new pan, just don't even cook with it if it ever gets a scratch in it, because that's way worse, because then the chemicals that are underneath seep through the crack and into the food as well. So definitely be looking out for that as well. So there's a lot of places that we can go with toxins. We did its own 3-hour class, not even related to cancer, several months ago. So you can find that on the YouTube channel. That one actually did take. But one of the main things is to check your fuse box. So anybody recognize this little guy? Yeah, he's mine. Yeah, this is my youngest. So he was my COVID baby. We didn't know he was going to be a COVID baby, but March 2020 shows up. He's due, and then a week later, COVID happens. So we got in and out of the hospital before any of the masks or regulations. Like I got to be there for the birth, holding my wife's arms and body, and just like whatever they needed me to do, I was on board for. So he's 10 pounds 6 ounces, probably my wife's crowning achievement when it comes to birth, because he's like 2 pounds heavier than the next two. But he was the healthiest baby. But in August of that same year, August 2020, he also became my most expensive baby. I got a phone call from the school that he had quit breathing, that they had resuscitated him, and they were rushing him to St. E's. And so I, of course, dropped everything, ran out of here. It was 9:59, so middle of shift, and met him at St. E's. They had got him onto the table in the emergency room, but they hadn't done anything else yet. And so while they do pretty basic vitals check just to make sure he's alive, I knew that no matter how much time and money we spent in that hospital, they wouldn't properly assess his spine and nervous system. They wouldn't check his vagus nerve. They wouldn't check his phrenic nerve. They wouldn't check any of the cranial nerves that go up and control how his body is responding. And he was gasping for air. He was in the middle of a seizure. And I go right to the top of his neck. And his little atlas is shoved over, pressing up against his vagus nerve. And I pushed it back into place. And as I pushed it back into place, it's a slow process when you're adjusting a baby, just gentle pressure, like feeling for the ripeness of an avocado. His seizure slowly stopped. His breathing slowly normalized. And then he asked for his mom because he wanted to nurse. And then we spent $26,000 to see if there was anything else wrong with him. You know, we were at St. E's, we did a chest x-ray, we did a CT scan of his brain. They found nothing. We went up to Children's in Omaha. They did an MRI with contrast. They did an EKG on his brain. Couldn't find anything. They ran cultures to see if there was an infection. They did a COVID test because it was August 2020. You have to get a COVID test. Everything came out negative. Negative in the most positive sense. They couldn't find anything. But I kept having to adjust him and adjust him and adjust him. And we're like, why is this having to adjust so much? We've gone, 5 months where I've only ever had to adjust him like a little bit. And this one is like way out and keeps going way out. What happened? Well, that morning, while we were getting ready for school, as kids do, my daughter didn't want to put her pants on. And she and my wife are wrestling on the bed, trying to get pants up. No, kick him off. Pull him up, kick him off. And baby Zeke is laying at the foot of the bed. And she happens to kick him in the head. Hard enough that he rolls towards the edge of the bed. My wife catches him, pulls him back on. He doesn't even hit the floor. But that strike to the head was enough to knock his atlas out of position. He was asymptomatic, didn't even cry after she kicked him. Yeah, he was 10 pounds 6 ounces. He's a tough little dude. But it did enough damage that when he was going down for his nap, and he always liked to sleep on his stomach, but they start them on their backs in daycare. When he flipped himself over, it was enough pressure from that big old chunk of a head on that vagus, or on that atlas bone, that knocked it out of position. And that started the seizure. That shut his breathing down. And of course, once I figured out exactly his subluxation pattern, we were able to get it corrected, and he hasn't had a breathing problem. He hasn't had a seizure since that day. And I thank God that I was a chiropractor, because there was no way that he wouldn't not still have seizures with that massive of a subluxation right around his brainstem and his vagus. When we look at the nervous system, it controls everything. Keeping your heart beating, keeping your lungs breathing, to digest and assimilate this food into this living, loving, thinking clay, your brain has to be telling every cell, tissue, and organ what to do. It doesn't happen any other way. You create new cells because your brain tells the part of your body that needs a new cell to build that cell, and it tells cells to die when they're supposed to. And when those cells don't die, what do they become? Cancer cells, exactly. And so you need your brain to be communicating with every organ, cell, and tissue in your body at 100%. And so when God designed this system, he surrounded it by bone. The skull surrounds and protects your brain, the spinal column, and every single vertebra here surround and protect the brain stem, the spinal cord, and each of these nerve roots when they exit off. And it has a normal position. It should be straight up and down from the front with 3 45-degree curves from the side. When it's in that position, there can be no pressure or damage on your nervous system. But when it goes out of alignment, even 2 millimeters or 2 degrees, let's say that's on the vagus nerve, let's say that's my neck. What happened to me? It cut off my lungs. What happened to Zeke? It cut off his lungs and it gave him a seizure. For some people, it creates an autoimmune condition in their gut. For other people, it creates a liver or a pancreas or a spleen problem, or they get gallbladder issues because it hits the right part of that nerve. And most people would say, well, I would feel that, right? A pinched nerve. Well, in the vagus nerve, there's no sensory nerves. You don't feel a vagus nerve subluxation until it hits an organ and makes it go wrong. And then you don't think it's a vagus nerve subluxation. You think it's an organ problem. You think your gallbladder has gone bad. You thought your liver's gone bad. You thought your lungs have gone bad. You think you're having a heart attack, but then they go in, the tissues are just fine, or they're just fine, except they've built these weird cells that are neoplastic or cancerous. Nervous system controls everything. Analogy for you. If your light bulb goes out and you go in and you change the light bulb, but it still doesn't turn back on, what should you check next? Fuse box. Your nervous system is the fuse box. The organs are the light bulbs. Doesn't matter how much you wax and polish the light bulbs, doesn't matter how many injections you give to the light bulbs, if the fuse box is disconnected, it'll never turn on. It'll never get as bright as it needs to. And that's the role of the central nervous system.
That's why you tell come here with it.
Yeah, because if the gut isn't getting the proper nervous system function that it needs, then it's not going to allow you to heal properly from that, right? And so,
Getting off the wall stuff that we have, we should tell you first.
at least let me check your spine, right?
That we know.
Yeah, because it won't always go. So let's walk down this. So subluxation means a condition of less light. That's the Latin terminology behind that. So let's say atlas goes off. Yes, we talked about the vagus nerve and going off, but let's say it affects the inner ear. Your balance starts going wonky. It can also create headaches. It can create sinus issues. It can create blurry vision, all sorts of things up there. If you have, if you're a guest tonight, we gave you one of these sheets. You can just look at the different things that subluxation can create on there. Next, we go down, middle of the neck. Most common area for arthritis, degenerative arthritis. You get a subluxation in the middle of the neck, whether you feel it or not. You already have phase 1 of arthritis. Phase 2, you start seeing bone spurs. Phase 3, those joints start growing together. Most common thing I see in patients with arthritis in the middle of their neck is thyroid problems. One of the most medicated problems on the planet, and we see patients reverse their thyroid issues by addressing the spine. We go down to the top of the back. This is where I see most women carry the stress of the upper back. Most common thing that I see subluxate this, cell phones and technology. Down here, every inch that your ear goes forward from your shoulder adds 10 pounds of pressure right here. And if you do this, like most Americans do, for 4 to 6 hours a day, then that's going to retrain this to hold that position. Then arthritis sets in, it starts pinching on the nerves that go here. Guess what the most common symptom of that is, besides just that stress across the shoulders? High blood pressure. We go down to the middle of the back here, right? Sometimes that feels a little tight between the shoulder blades. You know, open that up, get a spastic muscle there. Can also affect your liver, your body's ability to detox. It can affect your gallbladder in there. It can affect your pancreas and being able to produce proper digestive enzymes, specifically insulin being a huge, not enzyme, but hormone, affect your spleen's ability to filter out your blood, but it could just be coming from a spot in your back that's out. And we move down to the low back. Here, obviously it branches out to tons of digestive organs here, but just like you can get a spastic muscle of your low back, you can get a spastic muscle in your colon. It can create digestive issues. You can create immune system issues. It can ramp up the stress response down here. It can even start to affect reproduction. It can affect hormone production down here. And the most common pain symptom that we get down here is sciatica or sciatic radiculopathy, because as this disc wears out, oftentimes it bulges backwards and presses into the nerve roots or the spinal cord there and sends that pain shooting down your leg. But the most common thing I see for men specifically in this area, they'll get a slight posteriority of subluxation at L5 or slight anteriority, creating a bulging disc back there. And then their prostate starts going wonky. Their numbers start going up. The PSA starts climbing. And then we start getting them adjusted and they don't have to pee 5 times at night. It starts going back down and starts getting healthy again. Is it the only thing? No, but it is the first thing that we should check. And so how do we check it? Now, there's 2 main ways that we know how to check it. 3 really. So just in the last couple of weeks, we've gotten a new tool to be able to measure heart rate variability. And it's actually from the American Heart Association. It's a transdermal scan that we use just cell phones to measure. And it gives us a reading of 0 to 200, 200 being the best possible readout. And everybody I've scanned so far has scored less than 50. Vagus nerve tone is awful in America. Part of it is because we don't exercise enough, and part of it is because that atlas gets off so easily. All right, those 2 things are huge. Next, the surface electromyography scan. So this one's designed by NASA, slightly older technology than 2 weeks ago, but what we are able to see is the electrical readout of the peripheral nerves as they branch off of the spine. And it has normal levels and it has abnormal levels. If it has abnormal levels, if it's at a certain level where we rate it as severely high, like the nerves are overactive, it correlates at a 95% rate, not with pain, but with problems in the nerve pathway in the organs that will be diagnosed within 5 years, according to the NASA research. If it's too low, that correlates at a 99.1% rate. And so that's a test I do for free for people all the time. People should be begging me to come to their school and get their kids done, because we can predict problems before they actually happen when we do a nerve scan like that. But then from there, we need an X-ray, because the nerve scans just tell us if something's functioning well or not. It doesn't tell us why. And so we check your lifestyle, right? We see how well are you doing in each of those 5 areas, but the X-ray tells us how much the spine is out of alignment to be able to see if you've got arthritis there putting pressure on the nerves going to your thyroid, if you've got pressure here on the nerves going to the digestive system or to the prostate, or on the nerves running down your leg that makes that burning sensation all the time, or if it's creating that spastic low back, or if it's creating that neck pain, or if it's creating that headache, we know based off of how much out of alignment that is, correlating that back to that nerve scan and to the symptoms you're dealing with. And so that requires a very comprehensive history with that. So we went through a lot of the warning signs there as we walked down that sheet there. It goes through any possible warning sign that you could be dealing with. And so look at those. If you are dealing with any, circle them and then make a plan on how you're going to deal with them. But I would recommend that the first thing that we do is we check that fuse box and make sure that we're addressing that properly. So BJ Palmer said this. I think this is a really cool quote. Medicine is the study of disease and what causes man to die. Chiropractic is the study of health and what causes man to live. And if you use me as your chiropractor, then what I do is I apply that specifically to you. What is it that's making you healthy? And what is it that I can do or we can do together to help you live? And I always go back to John 10:10 with this one. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. But Jesus said, I have come that you may have life and have it to the full. He said that in the present tense. He didn't mean in heaven someday. He meant that if you're a believer, you should be experiencing life to the full right now. And guess what? The church is the most unhealthy demographic in the United States. And as a former pastor, that just breaks my heart. I hate to see that. I hate to see that, and I want to make a difference in how we do that. So, action steps. If you have not had your spine checked and you do not already have an appointment to do so, you can schedule that tonight. We're going to be doing that at the same discount that we're offering everybody on Facebook, which is my best discount right now. It's $37. It includes the exam, all the scans, the x-rays, your first adjustment, and a full report of findings. So for $37, you get to see everything that's going on with you at no additional cost or obligation to do anything from there moving forward. But if we find something wrong, what should we do?
Fix it.
Exactly, right? Number two, let's identify some of these things here. Maybe looking at the difference between healthy cells and cancer cells that you just might not be doing well right now. And I would just pick one thing, honestly. Just pick one thing to take action on. Because all the things that I talked about tonight, let alone the 3-hour class that we did several weeks ago, can be really overwhelming. And so pick one, at most 2 things to start working on today. And why today? Because if you don't do anything different than the way the rest of the world is doing it, why are you going to be any different from everybody else? Why is your results going to be better? No, it's going to come back, or you're going to get it. And then the survival rate for cancer, once you've had it once, is less than 1 in 5 after 20 years. So we don't just want you to survive, though. We want you to thrive. So let's make an action plan. If you want my help, I'm here to help you. So just let me know. Other sheet here, if you're a guest, is scheduling your exam. I've got hours set aside where we typically can do exam times. If you want an exam, circle that here. Just circle 1 or 2 different times that work for you. We'll make sure that you get plugged in at the best time for you. Make sure that we get your name, how you actually spell it on your driver's license, the best number to reach you at so that you can get text reminders for your appointments, and then the best time to call so that we can confirm appointment times for you, if that's after work or before work, depending on that. And then your date of birth helps us get you plugged into our system and ready to go there. And then there's a couple different opportunities on here. So this month, this is the last thing that we're doing other than our 12 days of Christmas discount off of supplements. Don't worry about supplements tonight. If you need to stock up, yes, they are at a discount for the next 12 days. But in the future, we try to do at least 1 class a month. And I've continued to make these free and open to the public. If you want to come back, definitely come back, but let us know so we can plan on it and so we can help send you reminders as well. If you want to come to another community dinner, the one thing I ask is if you've been to one already, bring a guest for the next time, somebody that's not already a patient, so that they can hear what we're talking about. It's going to be a slightly different theme and topic, but it's always going to be good food. If you bring a guest, no cost, right? Next, are you planning on joining us for our next workshop? So our next workshop is actually going to be a makeover. We're going to be focusing on metabolism and weight loss, getting your metabolism working for you. That one's going to be the first weekend, second weekend of February, somewhere in there. So you won't see it back there yet, but always be checking that calendar for things as well. And then I like doing this. I don't know if you guys can tell, but I like talking. So I will come to your work. I will come to your small group. I will come to your church. If I'm welcome and you want to invite me, just circle that one, put your church or work down there, a small group, or just write that in and then put your contact number down so that we can get that plugged in for you. So go ahead and fill that out. There should be a pen at each of your spots. If you're already a patient, just let us know. We'll get you signed up for the next thing. But I'm done for tonight. If you guys want seconds, go jump in and get some more seconds. If you have questions, I'll stick around for questions as well.
Don't be shy, son.
Yep, don't be shy.
Don't be shy.